one of the things that I've tried to do in going and talking to groups is give them a little bit of background of where and how the commission came about and kind of where we are now, and then more importantly my position and some of the concerns I have, and then how you all can be involved in this process, because there is one of the things we've been fighting for is to have a public comment meeting, and more importantly a portal on the website so that people can make comments what they think about reforms and expansion and all those types of things related to Medicaid and what the Commission's looking at. Now let me give you a little background of the Commission. The Commission was a compromise between the House and Senate in the General Assembly. The Senate wanted to expand and to move forward on expansion for Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. The House position was we did not want to expand, but we were in favor of reforms related to our current Medicaid system. And the reason being is the current Medicaid system in Virginia, what we taxpayers pay through the federal money that comes in and the state dollars that go in. And Virginia is one of the states that's about 50-50 proposition. The federal government provides about 50% of the funds for Medicaid recipients. The Commonwealth of Virginia is responsible for another 50%. It's all based on income and how well the state is doing. Some states are as high from the federal funding standpoint as 70%, and then 30% the state's responsible for. So we're at a 50-50 proposition, and that's one of the things that concerns us, because if we don't reform Medicaid with the current population we've got right now, it is 22% of the state budget, and it's the fastest growing part of the state budget. And people say, well, why is that important? Well, that's important because as it has grown, it means we have fewer dollars for other things like public safety or transportation or education or higher education, anything else that the state uses your tax dollars for services that are provided through the state. Over a 10-year period, it's grown from about $3 billion to $7 billion, and that's a 133% increase. That's very large, and it's been very quick over that 10-year period. And that's just with the current Medicaid population. We're not talking about any of the Obamacare-related items. We're not talking about any of those things. So the Commission was formed as a compromise because of those two divergent positions. The House was very interested in the Commission. It was actually an idea of our Majority Leader, Kirk Cox, and the staff that I work with on the House Appropriations Committee that work for us, because we felt like no matter what happened, the legislature needed to have some input and some control of what was going to happen related to this issue, because the General Assembly, in the end result by the state constitution, is the only body that can appropriate dollars. And as I just explained to you, even with the federal funds coming in, the state has to appropriate those dollars, and the state funds have to be appropriated through the General Assembly. So that's why the House was very interested in having some control and a legislative body that would have that control. Well, the compromise was 5 members of the House, 5 members of the Senate would form this Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission. The Secretary of Finance and the Secretary of Health and Human Resources also serve as ex officio. They're in the governor's cabinet. Some people have described them as the experts. I'm not sure they're the experts, but the healthcare secretary obviously has been involved in this whole process, because it's something that it's his responsibility through the Department of Medical Assistance Services, which is the state agency that he's responsible for that is administering Medicaid in Virginia. So it was formed, and we've had a couple meetings so far. But when it was formed, one of the things our Senate colleagues didn't really seem to understand was we put in the language, or the what is now in the state code that set up the commission, that at least three of each side of the 5 legislators had to approve any move to expand for Medicaid in Virginia. Well, we knew myself and the other members in the House that are not in favor of Medicaid expansion, that if we had enough people on our side that were appointed to the commission, that expansion could not occur anyway. So that was our game plan all along. And it worked. So far it's worked out that way. The other thing I forgot to mention was that Governor McDonald has not been in favor of expansion, and that's been his position all along as well. Again, favor of looking at reforms, looking at trying to bend that cost curve to make the system more efficient, cost effective. Nobody, I think, even on the Senate side, opposes that. I mean, that helps the system work better and be more efficient. So, so the governor agreed from that standpoint. Now, the commission was set up to meet every other month. Well, somebody asked me, why aren't you meeting every month? Well, we wanted to meet every other month because it delays things. We're not in a hurry to expand, so we put in place a mechanism for the commission to meet every other month, which keeps us moving down the road closer to the General Assembly session. We did that on purpose. That was one of the things that the House was, if the longer we delay things, the longer we make sure that we get closer to the General Assembly session. Again, the General Assembly has more say, and in the end result, the General Assembly is going to have to approve whatever the commission might do related to reforms as well. So we've had a meeting in June when we organized. We had a meeting in August. We started getting information in June. Senator Hanger was elected chairman. I was elected vice chairman. And then people have asked us, well, why did you not take on the responsibility of being chairman so you could control the process even more? Well, because we're only meeting every other month and we're, again, just really slowly moving and looking at the reforms, we decided on the House side that we wanted to have the senior House member in a position to be chairman for the second year of the commission. Well, why is that important? Well, it's not important if Ken Cuccinelli gets elected because we don't have to worry about an administration pushing expansion at that point. And the House obvious position has been and will continue to be, as long as the candidates we have running this fall get reelected, that we don't expand. So the worst case scenario, though, we believed is if McAuliffe were to get elected, we wanted to have more of a say the second year and really control that process from the legislature standpoint when the commission continues to do its work next year. So for good or bad, I'm going to be in the driver's seat next year, and I'm hoping I'll have somebody I can work with very closely in the administration with Governor Cuccinelli that will be working with us and not have to work in opposition to the next administration, but we'll see what happens. So that was another mechanism we decided, and that's, a lot of this is insider baseball, but there was a method to our madness, and that's the thing I've tried to get out and explain to people and want to really make sure that we do that. And the column goes into a lot of the detail as well and talks about a lot of this as well. Now, I've said and made it clear during the session, after the session, and even when the media called me after I was appointed to the commission, that I do not favor expansion. Now, the news media, as you all know, sometimes they're a little slow on the uptake. Well, they finally have started coming to realize that I'm not in favor of expansion, which is fine. And as I've told people, I've said that from the get-go. Every time I've had the opportunity to do that publicly or in groups, and I don't favor expansion. The other members of the commission on the House side, I do not believe favor expansion. What they are doing at this point is, at least two of them said, I don't want to come out publicly and say I oppose this until the commission's had a chance to look at the reforms and to look at some of these other things. So that's been their position. One member of our commission unfortunately hasn't been to a lot of meetings, and we're trying to see if we can replace her with somebody, again, that's opposed to expansion. So we're working on that. So the four of us that are still there and been active, Johnny Joanno, who's the Democrat, does not favor expansion, and for many of the same reasons I'm going to express to you in just a few minutes here. So we've got bipartisan support on the House side at this point, and we're moving in that direction. Now, importance of the commission from the standpoint of trying to make the system work better, from my standpoint, is probably the most important thing that we should be about and try to do, and that is to do these reforms. Some of these reforms are administrative. In other words, trying to get the state and the providers to work more efficiently and cost effectively. A lot of it has to do with just making sure we have records digitally as opposed to having a lot of paperwork. Some of these things are very simple. Some of them are more complicated. We have what we call a group of what we call dual eligible people. And that is those are people who are on Medicare, which is the other federal run program for seniors over 65 for health care, and also on Medicaid. Well, they're getting a lot of duplicate services, and more importantly, that's not very cost effective for people that are 65 and over that are getting those benefits, and then they're also getting, on top of that, all these Medicaid benefits. So we're trying to figure out and have a pilot going on to see if we can rein in and basically have a system where if you're 65 and older, you get one or the other. And we're trying to figure out which one's the most cost-effective and best way to do that, and that the federal government will allow us. Now, with these reforms, it's also important to note that we have to get the federal government's okay. The Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services basically has to approve any of the reforms that we propose. Now, the question is going to be, with the ones we've proposed so far, they've been very willing to work with us because they think if we do that, that we're going to expand. At least that's what they think. They haven't apparently been reading some of the news, but that's okay. The federal government doesn't always pay attention. So we may reach a point where we want to do some additional reforms, and they finally kind of catch up and say, well, wait a minute, are y'all going to expand or not? And we're not going to do these reforms unless you expand. So we may get into that catch-22 situation. We haven't reached it yet. We're still looking at reforms. And some of the reforms we're going to be looking at our October 22nd or 21st meeting, that's the next meeting of the commission where we're going to get information, is to hear from groups like the Heritage Foundation and other groups that have what I would consider more alternative proposals from the standpoint of reform from a conservative standpoint. And we're very interested in having them there and basically kind of giving the other side of the story, because some of the presentations we've had right now basically say, you know, you need to do all these reforms, you need to expand. And we're trying to get folks in that say, no, you need to reform, but you don't need to expand because this system is already broken and we need to fix what we've got before we look at doing anything else related to expanding Medicaid in Virginia. So we're working on that. You all will have an opportunity, as I mentioned, to comment on the website, which is MIRC.
Put it up, Ed.
.Virginia, okay, .gov, and it's Virginia spelled out. And it's got a comment section, so if you're interested in this topic and you're concerned, you can go there and you can either upload a PDF if you want to do that, if you want to scan a letter and send that to them, to the website, that'll work. Or if you just want to send an email, they'll put it in a PDF form so it can be posted. And a lot of these, all these comments are being posted, as long as somebody doesn't have, use bad language, that kind of thing. That's the only caveat. We don't want people, using four-letter words and all that kind of stuff. It is a public website, so. But they're posting those now, and I would say, I'd say 9 out of 10 are opposed to expansion at this point. The ones that I've seen, so that's good. Now, the meeting on October 15th is going to be a special meeting of the commission just to hear from the public, and it's going to start at 1 p.m. And the way it's going to work is the traditional way that we hold budget public hearings, and that is it's first come, first served. So if you want to get there early and you want to sign up and actually speak, feel free, but just make sure you get there at 10 or 11, maybe then have lunch and then come back, because there will be people probably there that are getting in line. I'm working with 2 groups, one to try to make sure they have folks there and are basically talking about some of these conservative reforms and these alternatives that I mentioned. 2 or 3 of them are going to be making presentations on October 21st, as I mentioned. But we're also trying to line up and make sure we have some experts that can refute some of this cockamamie stuff that the other side has put out, and saying this is the best thing since sliced bread and it's going to produce jobs and all these things that McAuliffe is talking about, that we want to make sure we have speakers to refute. So those 2 groups are the Americans for Prosperity. And actually, I don't know if a lot of you all know this. You know, Tim Phillips is the president of that group. Well, Tim Phillips was in my wedding. He was one of the ushers in my wedding. So we go back a long ways. We both worked for Congressman Goodlatte when Congressman Goodlatte was first elected. Tim was his chief of staff, and I was his district director. So I'm working closely with them, trying to make sure that they've got folks there, they have a chance to sign up and all those things. The other group I'm working with that's really helping us with the research and really trying to figure out these reforms that make sense from a conservative standpoint is Middle Resolution. They have contacts with the Heritage Foundation and other folks, and so we're trying to make sure that we have lots of folks there on the 15th. So if you can come down, I think AFP is talking about trying to have some buses. And there's more details will be coming out about that. So and they actually are going to be here. Some young people are going to be coming and going door to door to talk about this issue in Stanton and Senator Hanger's district, to basically encourage him to be more supportive of opposing expansion and really getting serious about these reforms that we need to look at. And they're doing that next Saturday. So there's a lot of activity going on, and because Emmett and I live in this community, a lot of it seems to be happening here, which is not a bad thing. That's a good thing. So that's kind of what I know from the standpoint of where we're going. Now let me tell you why I oppose expansion, and it's pretty simple. The federal government is broke. They cannot pay their bills now. We cannot borrow enough money from China to eventually pay for Medicaid expansion. Now, the opponents say, well, the system's set up so it's going to pay for itself. The problem is, 1, the way they've set the system up is not sustainable. 2, the system they've set up is not working. If you think the Affordable Care Act is working, why did the president delay implementation? It's not. It's the most cockamamie, ill-conceived piece of legislation that's ever been passed by the U.S. Congress. Because the way legislation works, the way it's supposed to work, even in the Congress, is 1, if they don't get it right, usually you try to go back and fix it. You know, they have sessions every year. They could go back and fix the parts that don't make sense, that are not working. Well, the president doesn't want to do that. The Democrat-controlled Senate doesn't want to do that because they want to move forward with this plan, because they know if we really start picking it apart and the Congress really gets to start looking at it again, all the states and all the citizens are going to really find out what it really does and how it really is going to be a burden on the country and states in the future. The legislation also was never intended to be the final product. And I can tell you as a legislator, you don't want a law on the books that was never intended to be what the lawyers and all the experts were going to have to base their decisions on, more importantly, the courts. Even the Supreme Court decision that found it to be constitutional, and the part that's forced the state, they didn't find the parts that Ken and the other states' attorney generals were opposing about the Commerce Clause and some of these other things, because they basically found that you can't do that. Obviously, that's unconstitutional, but what they hung their hat on was that it's a tax, even after the president and the supporters said it wasn't a tax. So it's just a mess. That's why it's being delayed, and October 1st, the federal exchanges are supposed to be up and operational. Have any of you all heard of anything about anything being up and operational? I haven't. I've had a lot of people ask me about it, and we don't know. Now, Virginia's defaulted to the federal exchanges because we did not want to set up state-run exchanges. We were concerned about the cost, and more importantly, we don't think the law is going to work, or that it's going to work from the standpoint of how they've set it up with these exchanges. So we're going to default to the federal exchanges. And a lot of states have followed and started doing that too, because they don't know. 25 states have moved forward in some form or fashion to expand. There are about 22 that are have it under consideration, and 3 are up in the air. And I think they put us in the 3 that are up in the air that have not expanded yet. So that's one reason, obviously, to oppose expansion, because it's just convoluted and it doesn't make any sense. The main reason is because as a state legislator, I'm concerned about how it's going to impact Virginia's budget. As I mentioned, it's already 22% of the state budget. It's increased 133% over a 10-year period. That's the current population in Medicaid. They project that if we expanded, there'd be additional 400,000 people that would come onto the rolls. And that would be partly because of what we call the woodworking effect, which is they come out of the woodwork once they know they're going to get something free, and they think they're going to get something better than they've got now. So that's why we call that the woodworking effect. And that's true for almost any government program, federal, state, or the like. That's the worst case scenario if we had 400,000 people. Well, you can imagine if the federal government doesn't provide the money for that. Now, where's that going to come from? Where's that going to come from the state? Well, if it were to occur, the state would have 3 choices. Because unlike our federal friends, we have to balance the budget. So we can't spend any more than we take in. We have to provide all the government services with the revenues, as are your tax dollars, and that's income, sales, corporate income, non-withholding and withholding are for people that do estimated taxes, and then the lottery and some other sources, but most of those other sources are specifically dedicated for specific purposes. So we really can't use those sources, nor we would want to, because that's just bad. If we set up something that's supposed to pay for itself, those funds should go pay for that, not be used for other purposes, which unfortunately we've done sometimes. So the 3 choices we would have, the state legislature and the governor would have, would be 1, to cut other services to pay for those expanded Medicaid individuals. That means public safety, education, to a lesser extent transportation, because again that's paid for by sales tax or the gasoline tax in Virginia, and some other federal funds that come in. So we'd have those choices. Or we could just reduce all the Medicaid individuals' benefits across the board to be able to cover all those people with the existing dollars that we've got. Well, as you can tell, one, you'd have all these people screaming that you can't cut my benefits, you can't cut my benefits, or we'd have to go out and cut all the other services, or the worst case scenario is that to pay for all those things and that expanded population, we raise taxes. So those are our choices. And I've tried to go around and talk to groups and explain that, with all full disclosure, I talked to a nurses group last night and talked about the same thing, because it is, those aren't easy choices. So that's why I do not favor expansion. Now, the other side says, well, the money's going to be there. They've promised the money's going to be there. It's going to be at 100% for the first 3 years, and then it's going to go down by the 7th year to 90%, so you'll still have 90%. But federal government has not had a budget in 4 years. The federal government has a $17 trillion debt. The Congress and the President are not getting along real well, or at least the House and the President are not getting along real well. So they've not really done a whole lot from the standpoint of activity to show me that the money's going to be there. The other thing that I remember from my first days as a member of the Appropriations Committee, back when, I hate to say this, when President Bush was president, you remember a program called Medicaid Part D? Oh, yeah. Now, I have to say, my parents, have taken advantage of that, like a lot of folks, and I don't begrudge people that have taken advantage of it. But the federal government, and this was under a Republican president and a Republican controlled Congress at that point, that said The states are not going to have to pay for any of this. It's not going to cost the states anything, right? It ended up costing Virginia about $300 or $400 million that we weren't anticipating. Now, at that time, the economy was good. So Virginia was able to absorb more of those costs because we had a growing economy and people's incomes were growing. We were having job growth, and that was, going along pretty well. So we were able to balance our budget and take care of that at that time. But let me tell you what the economy's doing right now. You probably just heard the report that Virginia's wages are below where they were before the recession, when you look at real dollars from the standpoint of where people's incomes are right now. Virginia's economy, historically, over 20, 30-year horizon, if we go back far enough, and when we kept more close track of this than we did before that, grew historically out of a recession at about 8%. So we bumped back up and recovered about 8%. We could pretty much depend on 8% revenue growth, those taxes coming into the state at about 8%. You know where we are now? We're about half of that. We're anywhere from 4 to about 4.6%. And it's not improving. The economy is still puttering along. And so that tells me right there, where's that money going to come from? And costs keep going up. Now, gas came down a little bit because of some of the things that happen with transportation, because there's more supply, but that'll go back up. Cost of living is still going up for most people. Cost of medications, all those things keep going up. So costs keep going up, but the economy is not really keeping up with the increases that we're seeing from a cost standpoint. So that concerns me. Then there's a little thing called sequestration. Sequestration wasn't supposed to happen. That's another reason you want to trust the federal government. That was never supposed to happen. That was a last resort. We're not going to have that happen. We'll fix the budget. We'll fix defense spending. We'll get an agreement between the president and the Congress, and everything will be good, right? Sequestration happened. It has had a huge negative impact on Virginia. Now, I'm not saying that cuts don't need to occur at the federal level. They definitely do. They've got to rein in spending. And one of the things that if we don't do expansion, if there are any extra dollars that we pay that are in the system, they can go to help pay off the deficit. I think that'd be a higher priority. At least it should be for the Congress and the President. But with sequestration, we've seen impact in Northern Virginia, we've seen impact in Hampton Roads, and it's not going to go away for a long time. In fact, we've set aside in the Virginia budget $30 million just to try to help localities weather that storm and help businesses retool so that they can go out and do other types of business other than defense contract work. So that's out there. So from my standpoint, I think it's fiscally irresponsible to expand and hope that the federal government's going to provide the money and hope that they'll fix the problems with the law and hope that we don't have these other problems that the economy is providing right now for us. It's our responsibility as state legislators to try to balance that budget, provide for the services, and not just look at what's going to happen here today and next year, but to look at as far as we think there's going to be a problem. And that's what I'm trying to do from the standpoint of Medicaid expansion. Now, I've told you what our choices are. I've told you about the MIRC and what's happening and why I'm concerned about it. Now, I'll tell you where I think we are from the standpoint of where we're going to go the next two meetings. We're going to get additional information. We're going to have that public hearing. Then we're going to have a meeting in December. The House members, and as the senior member, I talk to them before every MIRC meeting, and we have conference calls periodically to keep up with what's going on. So here's what I see happening in the future. The Senate may push for a vote in December before the General Assembly goes back into session January 8th of 2014. With all the House members having been elected or re-elected and sworn in, and the new governor, attorney general, and lieutenant governor. I think they're going to possibly push for a vote to expand. So we have a choice. we can either vote not to expand at that point, or we can just not vote, which either way, they don't have the necessary votes to move forward. So expansion, I don't believe is going to occur, but will be an issue that will be talked about during the General Assembly session, obviously, especially depending on who the governor may be. So if that doesn't occur, then we're going to go into the session, and then I think the issue is going to be around for 2 or 3 years. And I think that because, one, a lot of our members, and myself included, if we actually get some of these reforms, we think that they're going to work. It's going to take a while to see if they have the impact that we want to have, and that is to bend the cost curve, make the system more efficient, and provide better services to the people that are actually getting, Medicaid benefits. And lo and behold, if we make the system more efficient, you know what? We can actually have additional dollars, existing dollars, that we can use for additional people that may need it. Now, we've also for all the naysayers, Virginia has a safety net for people that are uninsured right now. That's the big push. We have to do this because we're going to cover the uninsured people. Well, one, we've gotten some information that shows insured people, some of them are going to give up their insurance and move to Medicaid expansion because it may be better. They may have high deductibles, they may have some other things. Well, that's wrong. We shouldn't be moving people onto a government system. It's supposed to be for people that can't get insurance or that don't have that service. It's called a health safety net. That's what it was supposed to be. So, the other thing, in addition to the reforms having savings, we also want to look at how they work, and that is going to take a while. So that's why we think the commission is going to need to be around at least another year to look at all those things and to really monitor them. The House members don't want to even have a vote on expansion until we look at reforms. The commission was set up to have reforms, and until reforms were either agreed to or implemented and it's implied we demonstrate that they're working, we can't even really expand under the way the commission was set up. Now, we'll have a debate about that, I'm sure, with our Senate colleagues, because I think they're reading it that once all the reforms are done and put in place, we can expand. But that's not the position that the House members believe that we understand the way the law is set up. Now, the other thing I'll tell you is, in addition to the commission working next year, the General Assembly in the end result, no matter what the commission decides, has to have the final say. And people say, well, the language says that expansion can move forward. It says it can move forward, but it doesn't say if the reforms are all agreed to, but it doesn't say it has to. One, we were very careful in how we tried to word this compromise. And then two, the other problem that the Senate is going to have is it has to be approved from a financial standpoint. Only the General Assembly can appropriate dollars. So the House and Senate are going to have to agree on funding to expand if that's the case. The House is opposed to expansion. The Senate, still may favor it, but that is going to be another issue that we'll have to debate and talk about during the General Assembly session. Now, we're looking at also, I was telling Georgia and Ed, we're also looking at another worst case scenario. We've tried to plan and look at this from the standpoint, I hope Ken's elected, and that's who I'm voting for. And I know the Tea Party doesn't take partisan positions, but that's who I'm voting for. Partly because of his position on Medicaid, but also because of his experience and a lot of other things. But if Ken's not successful, McAuliffe has said, and this is kind of scary, he's going to not sign a budget unless expansion's in it. So in other words, he's going to bring Washington-style politics to Richmond, which we've never seen before. So that's scary in and of itself. That's unusual. We, Democrats, Republicans, we've always tried to work out differences and come to some resolution and get it done and then leave town because we're part-time legislators. But that's what he has said. So if he's in there, we may be in session a long time next year. If he tries to do an end run and do an executive order, we're also doing some research and trying to figure out, no governor can by executive order override something the legislature has taken a position on. We've got the commission, the language is pretty clear that they have to agree that the reforms have been met before any expansion can be considered. So he's going to have to work around that. That's a state statute. And he can't override what the General Assembly has done, even though he seems to think he's going to be dictator of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we've got that stopgap measure. We're also looking at the possibility of working with the current administration to try to make sure that the budget language that's in there is strengthened so that the governor's current position is made clear, so that when we go into the General Assembly session and look at the biennial budget going forward, that we have a good, strong starting point for our position not to expand. So those are the things we're looking at from the standpoint. And we're trying to think these things through as much as possible and trying to be prepared.